Welcome everyone to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. Rob here, and I'm joined by Tyler Moffitt. He's a senior security analyst with OpenText. Tyler is deeply immersed within the world of malware and anti-malware. He's focused on improving the cybersecurity landscape through his work directly with malware samples, creating anti-malware intelligence, and testing in-house tools. Tyler, it's truly a pleasure to have you join us here today. Care to share additional background?
Sure, yeah. So I've been in cybersecurity for a long time. I mean, originally I worked at Best Buy Geek Squad for like 5 years, and then the number one product that we always used and recommended was Webroot. If anybody remembers that number one product at Best Buy, and so I was like, I'm going to work for Webroot because at the time I was in Boulder, Colorado, and they were headquartered there. So I applied for them, worked and 10, 11 years at Webroot, and then we got bought out by OpenText, and I'm still cooking here at OpenText, working on the Webroot product and the vast number of other products they have, helping out with all the security and threat intelligence and stuff they have. And we have quite an umbrella of security portfolio here now for sure. And I'm glad to help out. I actually work now in marketing. So I did work engineering for over a decade, and now I sort of help out sort of threat data liaison to marketing to make sure that what we're talking about is correct, on point, what's going on in the threat landscape, and, really just what we need to be talking about.
Yeah, translating that, right? Kind of in the middle of, you've had both sides of it, which is great. And I think that's what really kind of paints that real picture for people to better interpret. And as you were saying, the Best Buy days, and I do remember walking through and seeing kind of the boxes there, right? And it's like, here's Webroot. And so that's definitely a flashback for me. I appreciate you bringing that back up. Hey, one of the things I wanted to bring you on to discuss is obviously very timely with the great research report that the team has just conducted. And it's the 2024 Threat Hunter's Perspective, right? This is research that's got some really interesting findings. We're going to get into that, of course. But just to start, like, what was the methodology maybe behind the research? What was the kind of reach from an audience perspective? So what's the background that you can share before we get into some of the details?
Absolutely. So the products that we were analyzing were enterprise, of course, but I mean, pretty much all of the threat intelligence, when we come through making threat reports, whether it's from an enterprise product or small to mid-market, the threat intelligence is grounded in extensive data collection from the millions of sensors that we have across the various industries. And when I say sensors, I mean like literally the networks and devices that we protect, right? It gives us a wide angle view of like the cyber threats in real time. And then, our threat teams will analyze the telemetry, looking at the number of things, topical data to analyze, to find trends, and not only include technical details, but also, geopolitical context is very important to be able to determine what's going on here,
For sure. I mean, we've had some great conversations in the past with some other guests that, have really kind of painted that geopolitical landscape aspect, the nation states involved in a lot of what's driving these different types of threats. So, one of the things to start with maybe would be around really kind of those key learnings that you were able to pull through, again, tied into the nation state players. So, what are some of the current adversary tactics and trends that you're seeing out there?
So obviously the big 800-pound gorilla in the room is that Russia and China will launch attacks with geopolitical objectives. I know, big shock there, but obviously Russia would nail it down. They are primarily focused on, the Ukraine and the operations going on there. And they will basically target any NATO country that offers support, whether material, public, you name it. We saw clearly, and we have in the report, if you announce any type of support for Ukraine, expect an attack within 24 to 48 hours from Russia. And the same can be said for China, but their focus is in the South China Sea region. And as far as like just trends that we saw, one of the biggest takeaway trends we saw is that nation states will actually coordinate with cybercrime gangs. And that's very interesting, and not many others in the industry are really talking about this. So I'm glad we're sort of the first to really talk about it. Is we're not sure if the gangs necessarily have allegiance or like take orders directly from the nation state, or if they're like contracted and paid for their services, maybe a bit of both. But it was very clear, we saw them like to the hour, we were seeing coordinated attacks, not only from nation state malware, but from cybercrime gang malware that typically, is attacking usually just for money on weak targets. But then they were clearly pulled in for this operation against this specific target. And so it was very clear. And we have the evidence and data to suggest that they're absolutely coordinated, which is just insane. And furthering down that, you want even some more granular information and trends we saw that was interesting. was the day-to-day. Russia and China are a little different. So Russia, when conducting their attacks, we will see like a regular flow on a weekly cadence, like Monday through Friday, like at a sort of a 9 to 5, if you will, conducting their attacks, going on and off. And then Saturday and Sunday, they're off. And unless there's a big, giant specific attack going on, that's how they conduct most of their attacks. When it came to China, nothing at all. It was like you would see almost nothing and then a big, huge spike whenever they felt like doing whatever they were doing. And it was very interesting to see that. That does make sense from a standpoint from what we already know with a lot of these cybercrime gangs in Russia, is that it's like a legitimate business operation. Like,
That's right.
To give you an example of where cybercrime gangs, like for ransomware and all the ransomware as a service operators, they like work in an office building. A lot of the people there get like PTO, and like I'm sure they're talking at the water cooler about how they attacked and infiltrated this, dentist, or whatever they did and how they did it. And it's not considered a crime. As long as they're not targeting Russian civilians, it's considered legitimate business income. So
no, that's for sure. And you're bringing up several things that just remind me of previous episodes too, that I think we'll reference within the show notes for sure. Cause it's exactly that, right? It's a true business. These crime gangs are definitely connected back in many of these cases to, nation state sponsored activities. We had an episode a while back actually where, as you said, right, no surprise, Russia, China leading the pack. But we did have an episode that really delved into what's Iran doing, right? What's going on in that kind of side of things, and of course North Korea. So North Korea. So they're the four top, if you will, that are seen right now. The research also uncovered some really top threats and actors. I guess let's dive in, right? What are those top threats that you're seeing out there? Which threat actors are kind of the greatest concern? Does it tie all back into these nation states? Just what are you seeing out there overall on that front?
Yeah, so nation state actors from Russia, the most obvious, widely used would be Killnet. They use sophisticated, well-resourced attacks that are challenging, difficult to defend against. And they're typically aimed at like taking out or shutting down targets with DDoS, like, denial of service attacks, shutting down telecoms, whatever they're going after. And then China, their nation state group names are Storm 0558 and Volt Typhoon. I don't make up these names. I don't know where we get these names from, but that is what they're called. And then looking at the criminal gangs, right? Some of the big ones that we saw specifically in this report. And I can list a whole bunch of them because I work in many different types of sectors and things I'm looking at. But the ones in this report we saw were Black Basta, Vice Society, and Ransom Hub, which are very notable, especially in this year, ransomware campaigns. And then, of course, they target a range of industries, demand high ransoms for recovery, and they focus, critical infrastructure, healthcare, educational institutions. Honestly, ever since the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the gloves have come off, and they don't care who they at all anymore.
Another thing that really caught my attention going through the report were the findings or examples of findings that came across from the threat hunting activities, right? That were done and in support of the details that went into, again, the research. Maybe you can pick a couple that really were interesting to you that you could share with the audience.
Yeah. So I think one of the most obvious ones that we saw was try to be specific in details, but unspecific in the targets. A Western nation publicly announced support for Ukraine, and within 24 to 48 hours, massive wave of attacks targeted their largest railway operator to disrupt logistics and flow. And it specifically targeted the safety control systems. So they were trying to shut down the safety control systems of the trains, obviously trying to cause as much damage as they could cause. Gloves are off. And they used tools like Pony Loader and Killnet. We also saw it with elections specifically. They knew exactly when these elections were happening because there was like a first stage and a second stage. And you were seeing it happen like within, again, 24 hours, sometimes less than that they would target in DDoS. And as far as another specific one, which was really, I would say, surprising and showed you, I would say how strong the geopolitical conflict is. There was an unusual activity against a multimodal transportation service in Eurasia related to a military shipment. Okay. And this This shipment was hush hush. It was not publicly known. It's military, right? And for whatever reason, the threat actors seem to have insider knowledge. Using this information, once the shipment took place, there was a massive spike in like incoming attacks, and they clearly penetrated something and caused some sort of, I would say, foothold, because after that shipment and after that attack, there was a steady increase in outbound suspicious, geo signals. And it was very clear that they had penetrated, gained a foothold, and were relaying information after this shipment. And it was obviously, to disrupt critical logistics and shipments, but it highlights, a level of intelligence and precision, with threat actors and their targeting, which was very surprising.
Yeah. I think that's the key, as well as the intelligence, because once they have the details that they need, right, that precision for these hired guns in many cases is definitely there. That experience and knowing exactly how to make a negative impact, unfortunately, in many of these situations. Now, one of the things I occasionally like to do, Tyler, is ask the guest to look into the future. And so in this case, right, I want, from all this great research, right? So you've aggregated all this great research and put forth, again, a great research report. Looking out there, like, this is 2024 and we're still in it, right? But what are you seeing? What do you, like, if you kind of fast forward to next year, this time, releasing the 2025 version of this report, what do you think is going to be kind of some of the key areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think one of the first and biggest things would be the cyber arms race. We anticipate it to escalate. It's going to continue. These nation states, all of them on all sides, are hoarding zero-day vulnerabilities, which, as we know, are massive and are going to be backdoors, if you will, into all these types of hardware and software, and eventually infrastructure, right? Could be critical. Power grids, water systems, you name it. And we don't know until they decide to leverage to use them. And then from there, you have to worry about patching. And that's after the fact. That's after these, vendors go out and fix it. And so there is this dwell time, if you will, to where it is vulnerable and open and we don't know when to leverage them. So it's definitely stuff to worry about. And then, of course, the last one I want to talk about is AI, ML. Of course, got to talk about
Gotta
AI.
do it.
But yeah, generative AI and misinformation, it's going to make it easier for threat actors to produce not only convincing deepfakes, misinformations. I mean, gone are the days where you're really trying to educate people, talking about, looking out for suspicious phishing emails. And a lot of the tips or tactics, if you will, were like watching for the spelling or the syntax or the grammar and how they, like, that's all gone.
Yeah.
That's not
right.
There's no way that, you're going to be able to tell that this was made by a Russian, at all anymore when they leverage AI. That's all going to be perfect now. And so it's going to contribute to a rise in social engineering attacks that are just, they're going to be so much better, very difficult to discern. And then we also have to worry about now, like, fake videos or altered audio of public figures. We've already seen, these phishing whales create it where they try and create a fake meeting or phone call from the CEO or CFO saying the bank account's changed or I need the money sent here. I mean, it's going to be easy to mislead employees, the public, fuel distrust. It's going to be tough for sure.
Yeah, I think those are pretty kind of realistic, unfortunately. I think another one I'm going to add to it, Tyler, is and just talking to Eric O'Neill about this on a recent episode, we're always concerned about the impact of critical infrastructure. And I think, unfortunately, we're probably going to, see some major incident or incidents really impact critical infrastructure, like the eye-opening stuff, right? We've seen the different, aspects as it relates to infrastructure supporting, our drinking water, right?
Totally.
So all of those kind of components are very, very concerning, and unfortunately, they're very vulnerable. So that's an area I think you may be including in that report next year, unfortunately. Now, we can't be all negative and, not think about how we can share with the audience some different recommendations to consider. So I wanted to ask you, kind of how can people better improve their overall cybersecurity posture? How can they help alleviate some of these concerns, these issues they've been dealing with for some time, some things that you just mentioned that are probably coming their way? Just, what are some thoughts you have to share?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it does come back to, I would say, biggest one, focusing on security fundamentals. So eating your cybersecurity vegetables. I don't have anything jaw-dropping or amazing that you've never heard here before, but this is like basic stuff, right? Multi-factor authentication when you can, right? Patch management is huge. Not only am I working on this report, but other reports where I'm talking about how much money and how these criminals will leverage and get in. A lot of the times are through CVEs on these firewalls or whatever types of hardware or software that have been released and can be patched, yet are remaining unpatched because of whatever's going on with the security team, with their time to update or not considered critical, even though it's very clear it is critical. They're leaving the door wide open. And if you're not patching these, you're essentially allowing them to come in whenever they want to come in. And it's a real big problem. Understanding supply chain risks is huge for businesses. I mean, it's essential to access third-party vendors' security postures. Often cyber criminals, they're going to exploit the weaker links in the supply chain to infiltrate larger networks. It's happened before. We've seen big news with it, and I expect it to continue, not just from supply chain to bigger, larger, but even, let's say, compromising like an MSP and then moving downstream to their customers. I mean, we see that as well. Juicy targets. They understand that supply chain is so huge on a return on investment, if that makes sense, from what they're able to branch out to, that it's something you've got to be on top of. Leveraging signal analysis can provide insights into potential attack patterns and early warning signs. So it's really important to help organizations detect malicious activity and specifically attribute it, right, to specific threat actors. Doing the forensics after the fact and knowing where it came from, so you can know, okay, this is where our gap was last time. Here's how we patch it for next time. One of the most startling things we've found is that when looking at the top ways that organizations were compromised and labeling it down, was it RDP? Was it phishing? The number one reason was actually unknown. They didn't even know. They saw evidence of phishing and RDP and others, but they didn't actually know which one was first because their event logging management wasn't good enough. And so that's like crucial. So to make sure you know for sure he was the first timestamp. Here's what was the first thing, and so then you can know, okay, that's what we got to work on, which is really important. And so like practicing cyber vigilance, really important with attacks, often aims at major events. Businesses should prepare for heightened cyber activity during peak periods, such as product launches, financial reporting periods, major national holidays even, or election seasons. Increased awareness during times can help prevent disruption.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think, you hit a lot of key points, but as you started responding, it is your hygiene, right? The cyber hygiene, and that's what it always comes back into. So, Tyler, truly appreciate having you on today, talking about some of the key findings within the Threat Research Report. We will definitely link to it for people to be able to go out and get a copy and read it in further detail. Thanks again for coming on today, Tyler.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. I appreciate it.
Hello, producer Ben here, and during the episode, Rob talked about previous conversations that focused on Iran. One of them was episode 11, called Time to Take Them Seriously, What's Iran Doing in Cyber? It featured Bill Hagestad, an expert in nation-state cyber threat actors.
The bedrock of their success has been establishing the credibility within the tactical execution, both defensively and offensively. Certainly, as the regime starts to realize the projection of power capability, force projection that these hacker cadres have at the educational level. Again, remember the internet is essentially based at Islamic Assad University. They will start to realize that this is one of those non-proxy types of force projection capabilities. They'll be slower to adapt it as a leadership, but once they do, stand by, folks. Seriously.
That was Bill Hagestad in episode 11, Time to Take Them Seriously, What's Iran Doing in Cyber? Thanks for listening to Reimagining Cyber. If you listen to the podcast on Apple, please do give us a rating and review. Goodbye.